Jack was an ordinary teenager living in a small town on the edge of the forest. The eternal quarrels with his parents exhausted him, and one day he just couldn't stand it. Irritated and angry, he slammed the door and ran out of the house, heading for the woods to blow off steam. Jack knew this forest like the back of his hand. He often took walks here, but something was different today. He could feel it, but couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. The evening sky was changing to purple colors, and the forest seemed alive, as if it were watching him. He walked along the familiar path, immersed in his thoughts. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. No birdsong, no rustling of leaves, only the sound of his footsteps echoing in the dead silence. Jack stopped, blinked. Suddenly, everything around him changed. The forest had become unfamiliar. The branches of the trees thickened, forming a dark, almost impenetrable tunnel. Jack turned around to go back, but the path he had come down had disappeared. Instead, he saw only a dense thicket that seemed impenetrable. His heart was beating faster. He tried to find his way back, but the forest seemed to play with him, leading him deeper and deeper into its depths. He tried to find his way back, but the forest seemed to be playing tricks on him, leading him deeper into its depths. Panic gripped him more and more. He wandered through the forest for 2 days in this state, and finally he came to a small clearing. The walls of the hut were covered with moss and vines, and the windows were boarded up with boards. The hut reeked of antiquity and some inexplicable fear. He moved closer, hoping to find shelter and figure out what was going on. The door of the cabin creaked open, inviting him inside. Jack stepped over the threshold and found himself in a dark room filled with strange objects. Amulets, ancient maps, and photographs hung on the walls, many of them depicting people who seemed to be dead. On one of the tables was a large leather-bound book. Jack opened it and saw many entries in an obscure language. One page, however, was written in English. It spoke of a portal that opens in the forest and takes people to another world, from which there is no return, and whoever tries to get out the forest punishes even more severely. The creaking of the wooden floor was heard from behind. Jack turned abruptly and saw an old man in a long raincoat. His face was hidden in the shadows.
You came to me, Jack.
The old man said in an ominous voice. The forest has chosen you. Jack tried to speak, but his throat was dry. The old man stepped closer and handed him the amulet. This is your key to salvation, he whispered. But you have to be willing to sacrifice something precious. Jack took the amulet, and suddenly the room spun around him. The world lost shape and meaning. He felt his body dissolve into thin air, and his consciousness drift into endless darkness. He woke up in the same clearing, but now everything was different. The forest around him was even darker, and the silence was so thick that it seemed to be touchable. Jack realized that he had entered another world, parallel to his reality. There was no home, no parents, just the forest and the cabin. Trying to understand what had happened, he looked at the amulet again. It began to glow, showing him the way. Jack followed the light, which led him to a large stone archway covered with ancient runes. he realized it was the portal the book had mentioned. As he passed through the archway, he felt a strong resistance, as if he were being pulled from this world back to reality. He closed his eyes and took a step forward. When he opened them again, he was back in his forest near the familiar path. But something wasn't right. The air around him was cold, and everything seemed a little blurry, like a bad dream. Jack rushed home, but was greeted by strangers. His home was the same, but his parents didn't recognize him, claiming they never had a son. It turned out that he had never existed in this world. He tried to find a way to go back, but every time he returned to the portal, he discovered new, even more terrible secrets of this mysterious forest. It was as if the forest mocked him, throwing up more and more riddles. Jack felt that each return to the portal was taking a piece of his soul, but he couldn't stop. The desire to return to his world was too strong. On one such attempt, he noticed that the portal had become less bright, and the runes on the stone arch were fading. It was as if the forest was gradually closing the entrance back in, and time was running out for Jack. In desperation, he began searching for any clues that might help him make sense of what was happening. The next morning, he wandered into the forest and came upon an abandoned cemetery, hidden by thick bushes. In the center of the cemetery stood an ancient obelisk with inscriptions in an obscure language. Jack sensed that this place was connected to a portal. When he got closer, he noticed that one of the tombstones looked fresh, despite the obvious signs of antiquity. His name was carved on the stone. Shocked and frightened, Jack tried to find an explanation. Suddenly, the old man in the cloak appeared beside him.
"You should have been more careful,"
he said. "The forest takes those who don't respect its secrets." Jack demanded an explanation. The old man told him that the forest was a living creature that fed on the souls of those who dared to disturb its peace. The only way to get out is to pass the tests that the forest throws up and prove his strength and will to live. Jack realized he had no other choice. And at night, when he was about to give up hope, Jack encountered the portal again. The light was warm and inviting, and the runes glowed as brightly as ever. Jack felt ready to step through it, but before he could take a step, the old man reappeared before him. "I'm too old to keep track of the visitors to the forest. You must choose. Either you go back to a world where you are not known and forget everything that happened here, or you stay and become a guardian of the forest so that no one else gets hurt." Jack thought about it. He thought of his parents, of home, of a life that now seemed so far away. But he also thought of all the souls that were lost in this forest. He couldn't let this place consume anyone else. "I'll stay," Jack said, realizing his fate. The old man smiled and disappeared, and the forest around him began to change. The darkness dissipated, the trees grew lighter, and the portal disappeared, leaving only peace and quiet. From then on, Jack became the new guardian of the forest. He made sure no one was trapped in this place, protecting others from the horrors he himself had endured. Though he never saw his home or his parents again, he found his purpose, preserving the peace and secrets of the forest for future generations. Thus ended the story of Jack, who became part of the legend of the mysterious forest, and everyone who heard the story understood. The forest takes only those who do not respect its boundaries. and the keepers make sure that the darkness never returns.